I'm going to take you through a fascinating encounter between the Frenchman, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, and the Russian, Alexander Grischuk, played in round 4 of the Candidates Tournament in Yekaterinburg in Russia. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via PayPal or patreon.com. You'll see details how you can donate in the link below in the video description. Right, on with the game. Maxime, of course, one of the joint leaders of the tournament after 3 rounds, but it is very tight at the top, 3 players with 2 points. Now, Grischuk repeats his Berlin variation of his game in previous round in Yekaterinburg against Nepomniachtchi, and Maxime repeats that line. It's the endgame variation of the Berlin. You know, this has somehow gone out of fashion for White. But, well, we've seen a couple of games in this line already, and it does lead to incredibly complex positions. I think the Berlin, I think is often really misunderstood because these lines are incredibly complicated, very imbalanced, but they are very hard to understand. I mean, Black has a very nice blockade on these light squares that make it extremely difficult for White to actually realize this 4v3 pawn majority on the king's side. But the problem is that you can see that because Black is unable to castle, then these rooks don't join together. Yes, it's my favorite theme, split rooks, whereas White's rooks are joined together, and that means that he's able to carry out some very nice attacking opportunities, or has attacking opportunities, as we'll see. So this line has been very well rehearsed by the elite players. And this is exactly the same as Nepo against Grischuk in the same tournament. And here Nepo played King H2. Maxime has previously played Knight E4. But today he went for G4, which he'd played before. So you can see that in order to get the pawns rolling, Maxime has had to basically damage his structure. And certainly there's no E and F pawn duo. So Black has reasonable security here. But this rook certainly looks very funny, stuck out on a limb, miles away from its brother on the other side of the board. And here Grischuk invested so much time, 53 minutes. I mean, they're living up to their reputations. So we have Grischuk, the time pressure addict. We have Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who has a very narrow opening repertoire, which he understands very, very deeply and has analysed very deeply. So here he's had this exact position before against Nakamura, and there he played G4. And that game ended in a draw after 67 moves. This is not an easy variation. But here he played H4, which of course induced another massive think from Grischuk, who thought for 21 minutes over knight to D5. So we can see previously that Black has shattered the queenside pawns, and now this knight hops round to attack those pawns. And here, really, to get anywhere, White has to play very dynamically. Now, I'm going to skirt over a lot of these moves because I want to analyze one particular position which is so complicated and it deserves some time spent over it. But basically we can say that Maxime has given up a pawn in order to sideline this knight for the time being, and also to get his rooks going, because he has a very simple plan here, and that is to double rooks on the f-file, and in combination with the knight to hit the f7 pawn. Now if he can break through there, then black's king will actually be in huge trouble. So this is Maxime's big idea. So Grischuk has to really strain himself to stop that idea. So first of all, bishop here attacks the rook, and now knight b6. So, well, obviously the knight was attacked and it has to come back into play, and the bishop can't be exchanged off here. So this knight can potentially come back into play via d7 or c4. Remember, black is a pawn up. So critical moment. Maxime has given up the pawn, but he's managed to get his pieces directed against that pawn on a7. If that pawn goes, black's king is in massive trouble. Just a reminder, that king moved on move 8, it recaptured a queen, so it is impossible for black to castle queenside here. That's very, very important. That king stays in the middle. So now, how does black react to this threat to take on f7? Well, rook g6. So that means if knight takes f7, then rook takes g3. He's actually winning. So he's simply pinning that knight. So how should white react against that? Well, what about, I should say that here he played, Maxime played rook f5. King h2 looks like a simple move to protect this pawn, but then bishop c4. And if white continues with this battery on f7, then actually black gets very good play. This rook comes into play, and this is actually very strong counterplay. So Maxime instead chose rook f5. Now the point of this is to let this bishop into play, is to protect the knight so that the rook can be driven away with pawn to h5. So this continues this idea of attacking on the f-file. So Grischuk has to react against that. So therefore bishop c4, attacking the rook. Now if that rook moves up, then once again rook d8 is problematic, because that rook is going to enter the game. So just for a moment, Maxime has to compromise and moves the rook away from the f-file. So now Grischuk moves the king up, perhaps in order to get this rook into the game, and h5 pushes that rook away. In fact, black's best move here is to play bishop e6 to push that rook back, but okay, that's another story, but it should still be okay for black. But Grischuk played rook h6 and g4, so a little bit of progress for white, that the rook has been pushed to a worse square. These pawns look quite healthy. So the rook stepped back out of the line of the bishop on c1. And here is where Vachier-Lagrave really stepped up the pressure. Pawn to a4, so he's already given up one pawn, and with this he's throwing more wood on the fire to get his pieces going. So this opens up the diagonal so that the king can be attacked. And here Grischuk took that pawn. Let's just have a very quick look at what would happen with bishop e6. In this case, white could take and rook f1 to attack this pawn. And you can see that that can't be defended with the rook because then bishop a3. So we can see already that that a pawn has a point, vacating the a3 square. So basically white would break through here. Now this still isn't completely clear, but you can see that those pawns have real potential. But okay, still a long way to go. So bishop e6 is probably the best move in this position actually. But Grischuk took the pawn on a4. And here is where Maxime missed a golden opportunity. He checked with the bishop on a3. In fact, rook e4 gives white, well, I was going to say a win or winning chances. Let's just say very good chances to win. Now, I'm going to concentrate on this position because it deserves some time, frankly. And it is fantastically complicated. So first of all, rook takes, bishop threatened. Let's just go through really logically. So how does black react? Well, if the bishop, say, moves back here, we play rook takes knight. So this is one of the basic problems. But also remember that that bishop has to keep protecting the f7 pawn. Okay, so a few possibilities. The bishop can move back here to attack the rook. The pawn could come up to protect the bishop. Or the knight could retreat to protect the bishop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each move in turn. So first of all, let's maybe play the most obvious move, pawn to b5. But here white eliminates the bishop, which was defending the pawn on f7. So rook takes pawn check. So white is now down an exchange, but actually the initiative is so strong here. I think we can say this is a winning position. The king is in massive trouble. You know, also white might just sweep across and take this pawn. And then two connected passed pawns should be winning. Let me just show one variation. Rook here, a bid for counterplay. And yes, black's rooks are split. This is the big problem. So bishop a3 threatens a very nasty check, so c5. And knight f7 forks the rooks. Should be winning. Potentially a check on d6 as well. Or after bishop a3, rook d7, and, well, a little tactic to win the game. And knight f7, check, forks, king and rook. Okay, let's go back. So b5 would allow this powerful exchange sacrifice. Okay, let's try knight b6. Well, this one is a little bit different because after the exchange sack, then the knight is in a far better position. Still possible, but actually better to play like this. Bishop a3 check. So the king steps back, maintaining protection of the pawn. But we take anyway. And after this, you can see basically the bishop is in trouble. Bishop g8 is suboptimal because of checkmate. So there is a problem with that bishop. So bishop takes h5, let's say. Now here, rook f4, instead of taking, again, we threaten mate. And once again, black would love to castle queenside. It's against the rules. The king has already moved. So black has a massive problem here. Well, knight back at least defends against the mate. But this position is winning for white. Let's take here. So if the knight moves, let's say here, then rook f8 is once again mate, and if knight f6, then h6 undermines the knight. I mean, this rook on a8 is a mere bystander. c5 is really the only move to block out the bishop, but, well, in this position, white picks up the g-pawn, and that should be a win. Should be a win. I think the passed pawn is going to be too strong. And there's an extra bishop. Don't forget that. So, well, there's a few more variations there, but you get the idea. I think the knight b6. So knight b6 and b5 are losing. So let's try the only other plausible move, which is bishop e6, so that if rook takes knight, then bishop takes rook. So we take the bishop. Now, king takes will allow rook takes knight. So pawn takes attacks the rook. But now bishop g5 check. The bishop enters the game from the other side. And rook f3. This is very nice. It's a kind of slow motion attack, but it works beautifully. So the rook threatens the knight. The knight could come back to c5, but then rook here. Very simple idea. The rook is simply going to enter on f7 and clean up. Like this. And actually, the attack is just too strong. Rook e7 check threatened, and it is devastating. And if b5, then same thing. The rook comes in. Well, this is really the king d7 is the only move. Otherwise, rook f7 and rook e7. So king d7, the king sort of escapes for the time being, but having taken this pawn and with two connected passed pawns supported by the bishop, should be winning for white. There are a few more variations, but basically this move, rook e4, looks like it's a winning move. You have to play really accurately. And, well, I don't know what Maxime overlooked there. Of course, he would have considered rook e4. Hard to say. In any case, he played bishop a3 check. So that was blocked. And now e6, which comes close. Of course, if this is taken, then white is breaking through. Remember, there's a pin here. But f6 holds. And although white gets back the material, this liquidates into a rook and pawn endgame. So this is a forced continuation. And here, black has enough counterplay. It's funny that this rook, which so often is just useless in the corner, actually comes into play without even moving, as it's able to support the passed a pawn. And basically, white does not have enough here. Some accurate defense by Grischuk in spite of his time shortage. He ran pretty short of time again, but basically we're drifting towards a draw now. And the players liquidated. So you can see we now get down to a completely drawn king and pawn endgame, and the players played it out till just kings were on the board. So, as I said, the Berlin variation often leads to incredibly complicated positions. I think the problem is they're very difficult to understand, not just for the players, but for us. You know, even when, you know, us bystanders are analysing with silicon monsters, really tough positions. So there we go. In fact, all 4 games in round 4 of the candidates were drawn today. So no change on the leaderboard. We have Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, Yan Nippon-Nishi, and Wang Hao all in the lead, but it is very tight indeed. Thanks very much for watching. More coming tomorrow.